You've been to old houses, right? And historical states or pioneer villages. The ceilings are sometimes very low and the beds are too small. Sometimes you even see outfits displayed and they look so tiny. It makes us think our ancestors were small. In this video, I'm going to go through some real-life comparisons of how tall people were back then, and we can see how it relates to how tall you are today. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Here on Mortal Phases, I go through family trees and historic figures, and today it's about our ancestors. So let's get started. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos and let me know in the comments who you want to see next. Did you know throughout history, ceiling heights correlates to the amount of heat you want to retain in a room? More modest, smaller cottages in colder climates, like the English countryside where the occupants lack resources, would mean you want to build a smaller room to save costs and heat it more efficiently. If you were wealthy, you could afford high ceilings, which could make a small space seem much bigger, but that means bigger moldings for decor, more fuel to heat the space, bigger light fixtures, and a taller fireplace. So the next time you go to a historic site, if it's a more affluent one, you can see ceilings much higher at 9 to 13 feet tall. Or, take note, if you go to a medieval or Victorian cottage, those ceilings could be 7 or 8 feet, all because of heat retention and cost savings. So if you work your way to the bedroom, you might notice the beds are small. In fact, if you take a measuring tape, many of them would exceed 6 feet 3 inches, which is the standard today for at least a double bed in North America. Some are as long as 80 inches, which were found in historic beds, and that's the same as a king size today. Until beds were mass produced and sold into stores, they were bespoke, made for the individual. So depending on how tall you were, that's how long your bed would be. And the reason beds may look shorter was because of all the extra toppings that were on the beds. It began with a mattress, usually made of straw. The poofiness of the straw mattress would bring in the sides, giving us an illusion of what seems vertically protuberant. This differs from our very flat and squared mattresses of today. Add layers of quilts and the 4 posts, and it seems much more compact than spread out. So how tall were our ancestors if a bed had to be made to their measurements? If we start in the medieval period, we have to remember that medieval society was highly differentiated by class, wealth, and privilege, as well as socioeconomic trends like the fall of an empire, the Renaissance, or the plague. What it comes down to is food. A protein-rich diet made people taller, while a grain-rich diet made people smaller. Coastal regions where fish was abundant provided cheap and readily available sources of nutrients. Move inland and you have to rely on hunted meat or cattle, which is much more expensive. So if you look at the Scandinavian regions, which could gather fish for all levels of society, the average height is higher for all levels of society. People in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden in the Middle Ages would typically be around 5 feet 7 inches or 5 feet 9 inches. This is just Europe though. In different areas of the world, we have different height standards, but the theory is the same. More nutrients you're taller, less nutrients you're smaller. While someone living in mainland Europe, like the former Roman Empire, would rely more heavily on a grain diet, especially if you are a poorer laborer, and thus your height could see itself as 5'3" or 5'4" in the Middle Ages. Let's look at another example in England. Henry VIII was a staggering 6'2", while surviving medieval armor, which would have been worn by a knight, were tailored for men over 6 feet. They may have lived more inland but had access to protein growing up because they would be able to afford it, and that is the key. Let's look at Victorians. Here is a chart. This is the average height of a male soldier during the Industrial Revolution. And I want you to look at this particular part after the 1780s, where the Irish soldiers are taller than the English soldiers. And the answer to that is urbanization. England, in comparison to the surrounding civilizations, urbanized much faster and earlier. With urbanization, it's brought everyone to a single center, and that means you had to feed people. But with what? Well, bread, starches, and simple carbs. They were cheap and quick, and you can make it in mass. The purpose is to fill the belly. These working class individuals maybe couldn't afford much variety or meat like the more affluent ones, so nutrition amongst generations of people decreased. In 2008, there's a study called Transgenerational Effects of Prenatal Exposure to the Dutch Famine on Neonatal Adiposity and Health in Later Life, which concludes that maternal undernutrition during gestation is associated with increased metabolic and cardiovascular disease in the offspring. So it's not just one generation that's stunted, it's their offspring as well. And it actually took multiple generations after the Industrial Revolution with the information age and increased knowledge of nutrition to get back to being close to 6 feet. So what we know now is that you need proper nutrients from a young age to grow efficiently and reach your body's maximum height. If you're stunted from lack lack of nutrients as a child, you're going to be a shorter adult, and that's what happens in these urban areas. The authors of this, Paul Clayton and Judith Rowbotham, How the Mid-Victorians Worked, Ate, and Died, assert that poor nutrition in urban areas meant that the British Army, specifically their infantry, had to have lower minimum height requirements for recruits from 5 feet 6 inches down to 5 feet 3 inches, and then it was later lowered again to 5 feet by the late 1800s. The reason the Irish were taller was because those in more rural areas had a better intake of quality nutrients. They could grow their own food and hunt their own game. If in the city you could only afford bread, then that's all you got. And we know just how nutritious bread can be. It was a quick and easy food. So looking at historic artifacts our ancestors left behind, their beds and clothing, which mainly the Victorian era we have retained, yeah, most of them probably were short, but does that mean all our ancestors were short? No. The average height of humans went up and down. 40,000 years ago, the average hunter-gatherer European male was 6 feet. 10,000 years ago, with the adoption of agriculture, refined foods, and failed crops, and a more restricted diet, the average European male was 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 6 inches. While 600 to 100 years ago, poor diet in urban centers were the main causes of a shorter stature, and mass shrinkage happened when industrialization really took off. But generally, the wealthy and rural counterparts who were able to eat less refined food remained close to 6 feet if that's what your diet consisted of. Today, European males are on average 5 feet 9 inches, and the increase in height over the last 100 years is due to improved diet and healthcare. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. You can check out more videos on my channel, subscribe for more. Each of your subscriptions does help this channel grow. It allows me to continue making more content for you. Let me know in the comments who you want to see next. I do make a list of all your suggestions, and I will see you in the next one.